The sun had barely crested the eastern horizon when Penelope Vaughn felt the leather straps cut deeper into her shoulders, her boots slipping against stone as she hauled the iron plow another foot through soil that seemed determined to reject her efforts. The morning of April 12, 1878, had arrived without mercy in Dorado, Kansas, where the land stretched flat and unforgiving in every direction. And Penelope had learned that survival meant working until your hands bled, and then working some more. She had been at this since before dawn, her muscles screaming as she pulled the plow her late husband had bought just 3 months before a fever took him, leaving her with 80 acres of unbroken prairie and debts that would swallow her whole if she could not prove this claim and bring in a crop. The rocks embedded in the Kansas soil caught the plow blade with each step, jarring her shoulders and threatening to knock her off balance. Penelope was 22 years old and had never imagined she would become both woman and beast of burden, but the horses had died during the brutal winter, and she had no money to replace them. The harness dug into her collarbone as she leaned forward, her calico dress already soaked with sweat despite the cool morning air. Her dark hair, which she had pinned up hastily in the darkness of her sadi, was coming loose in damp strands around her face. She heard the horse before she saw the rider. The rhythmic sound of hoofbeats made her pause, straightening slowly, one hand moving to shield her eyes from the climbing sun. A man approached from the direction of town, sitting easy in the saddle, leading 2 draft horses behind him. Penelope felt her jaw tighten. She had learned that men offering help usually wanted something in return, and she had nothing left to give except the land itself, which she would die before surrendering. The cowboy reined in his mount about 20 feet away, studying the scene before him with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He was perhaps 25, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting, wearing dusty range clothes and a hat pulled low against the morning glare. For a long moment he said nothing, just looked at her standing there in the harness like a broken plow horse, her hands raw and her pride in tatters. Then he dismounted, ground tying his riding horse with the ease of long practice. Penelope opened her mouth to tell him she needed no charity, but he was not looking at her anymore. He moved to his draft horses, 2 massive chestnuts with patient eyes, and began unhitching them from the lead rope. His movements were efficient and practiced, the motions of a man who had done this work 1,000 times. He brought the team to her plow, studying the hitch for just a moment, before beginning to attach the proper harness. "I do not need your help," Penelope finally managed, her voice hoarse from lack of use. She had spoken to no one but herself for 3 days. The cowboy did not pause in his work. His hands moved steadily, buckling straps and checking the fit with the calm assurance of someone who knew horses and equipment. "Did not figure you did," he said, his voice low and roughened by dust and wind. "But those shoulders are going to give out before you finish the first acre, and this land will not wait for you to heal." Penelope felt something hot and angry rise in her chest. "I have been managing. I can see that." He stepped back, examining his work, then moved to the plow itself, checking the blade angle. "Ground's rocky here. Need to set this shallower for the first pass." He made an adjustment she had not known was possible, his hands moving with practiced certainty. "Why are you doing this?" The question came out sharper than she intended. For the first time, the cowboy looked directly at her, and she saw his eyes were a clear gray, like creek water over stones. "Name is Wade O'Brien," he said. "I work the Campbell Ranch 3 sections west. Saw you out here yesterday when I was checking fence line." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "My mother tried to work a farm alone after my father died, broke her health doing it, Figured I could spare a morning." Something in his tone told Penelope this was not a rehearsed speech, not charm or manipulation. There was a matter-of-fact quality to it, as if he were simply stating the way things were. She felt the fight drain out of her, leaving only the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. "Penelope Vaughn," she said quietly, reaching up to unbuckle the harness from her shoulders. Her fingers fumbled with the leather, stiff and clumsy, and she felt tears of frustration prick at her eyes. Wade stepped forward, his movements careful, and helped her with the buckles. He did not touch her beyond what was necessary, and his hands were gentle despite their calluses. "You have coffee?" he asked, stepping back as soon as she was free. "I do." "Then I will take a cup when we finish this field and we will call it even." Before Penelope could respond, Wade had taken up position behind the plow, his hands wrapping around the wooden handles with easy familiarity. He clicked his tongue at the draft horses, and they leaned into their collars. The plow bit into the earth with a sound that was part tear, part sigh, and began to move steadily forward. The horses pulled with the calm strength of their breed, and Wade guided the blade with small adjustments, keeping the furrow straight despite the rocks that wanted to throw it off course. Penelope stood watching, rubbing her aching shoulders, unsure what to do with herself. She had been fighting this land alone for so long that the sight of someone else working, it felt almost dreamlike. The sun climbed higher, and Wade moved down the field in a steady rhythm, the muscles in his back and shoulders working beneath his shirt. When he reached the end of the row, he turned the team with practiced efficiency and started back, creating a parallel furrow that was arrow straight. She found herself walking to her soddy, the small dugout carved into a low rise that served as her home. Inside, she stirred the fire in her small stove and set coffee to boil, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind tried to process what was happening. Men did not simply help without expectation. Her husband, Thomas, had been a good man, but even he had married her because he needed a wife to help prove his claim and work the land. That was how the world worked. Everyone needed something from everyone else. But Wade O'Brien had asked for nothing except coffee, and he was out there breaking her field as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Penelope stepped outside again, carrying a jar of water she had drawn from the well that morning. Wade had completed 4 rows, more progress than she had made in 2 days of brutal effort. As she approached, he saw her coming and pulled the team to a halt, walking to meet her. He took the water jar with a nod of thanks and drank deeply, his throat working. When he handed it back, his expression was thoughtful. "You have about 40 acres that could be planted if you can get them turned in time," he said. "Corn would do well here, maybe some wheat on the higher ground. You have seed." "Some," Penelope admitted. "I was planning to plant 20 acres. That is all I thought I could manage alone." Wade looked out across the unbroken prairie, his eyes narrowed against the wind that never stopped in this country. 20 might keep you from starving, but it will not clear your debts or see you through next winter. You need at least 30 under cultivation to have a chance." "I know what I need," Penelope said, hearing the edge in her own voice. "I also know what is possible changes when you have help. And how much will this help cost me, Mr. O'Brien?" He turned to look at her then, and she saw something flicker in his gray eyes, not anger but perhaps disappointment. "I told you, a cup of coffee. I am not looking to take advantage, Miss Vaughn. I am just trying to keep you from killing yourself." Penelope felt shame heat her face. "I apologize. I have learned to be suspicious. Nothing wrong with that. Woman alone has reason to be careful." He handed back the water jar. "But I give you my word, I want nothing from you except to know you have a fighting chance to keep this land. My mother lost our farm when I was 16. I watched men circle like vultures, making offers that were barely legal theft. She had to take one in the end. Lost everything my father worked for. His jaw tightened. I swore then I would not stand by if I saw it happening again. The raw honesty in his voice caught Penelope off guard. She studied his face, searching for deception, but found only a kind of weary sincerity. "Your mother, is she well now? She died 2 years after we lost the farm. I think losing it broke something in her." Wade looked away, out toward the horizon. "I was too young then to help proper." "I am not any more." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind carrying the scent of turned earth and distant grass. Finally, Penelope nodded. "Then I thank you for your help, Mr. O'Brien, and that coffee will be ready when you are." A small smile touched the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen from him. "Wade is fine, and I best get back to it if we want to make good progress before the heat sets in." He returned to the plow, and Penelope watched him work for another moment before heading back to her soddy. She busied herself with small tasks, mending a shirt, kneading bread dough, but her attention kept drifting outside where Wade moved steadily across her field. The draft horses worked with patient strength, and Wade handled them with a gentle firmness that spoke of real skill. She noticed how he adjusted the plow depth as the ground changed, how he guided the team around the worst of the rock outcroppings, how he stopped periodically to clear debris from the blade. By midday, Wade had broken nearly 10 acres, more than Penelope would have managed in a week of brutal effort. He brought the team to a halt in the shade of her soddy, and she emerged with bread, cold bacon, and coffee. They sat on the bench outside her door, eating in companionable silence. Penelope found herself acutely aware of his presence, the way he moved with deliberate care, the quiet competence in everything he did. "The Campbell Ranch," she said finally. "You said you work there." "Foreman," Wade confirmed. "Been there 3 years. Good operation." "Mr. Campbell runs about 5,000 head, treats his men fair. And he allows you time away to help struggling homesteaders," Wade's mouth quirked. "I work 6 days a week, dawn to dusk and sometimes longer. Sunday is my own time. I choose to spend it how I see fit." Penelope absorbed this. "This is your day of rest. I have rested enough in my life. Rather do something useful." She did not know what to say to that. They finished their meal and Wade stood, settling his hat back on his head. "I should get a few more hours in while the horses are fresh." "You have harness for tomorrow if I bring the team back." "Tomorrow? Field this size. We can finish the breaking by next Sunday if I come back. Then you can start planting." He said it casually, as if it were already decided. "Wade, I cannot ask you to give up every Sunday." "You are not asking." "I am offering." He met her eyes steadily. "You do not have to accept, Miss Vaughn, but the offer stands." Penelope wanted to refuse. Pride demanded she handle her own problems, prove she could manage alone. But pride would not plant 30 acres or clear her debts. Pride would not save this land. "I would be grateful," she said quietly. Wade nodded once, then returned to the field. Penelope watched him go, feeling something shift in her chest, some tightly held thing beginning to loosen. She went back inside and threw herself into her own work, scrubbing the floor of her soddy, washing clothes in the big copper pot outside, mending harness that would be needed when planting started. But her ears tracked the sound of the plow cutting earth, the low voice Wade used with the horses, the steady rhythm of work being accomplished. When the shadows grew long, Wade brought the team back, unhitched them, and rubbed them down with care before giving them water and the grain Penelope brought from her meager supply. She tried to protest the loss of feed, but he shook his head. "They earned it. I will bring grain next week." "You have done enough." "Have I?" He looked at the field, where fresh-turned earth marked the day's progress. Looks to me like we have barely started." Penelope followed his gaze, seeing not what had been accomplished but what remained. 40 acres of unbroken prairie and only 1 day a week to work it. It is an impossible task. Most worthwhile things are. Wade gathered the lead rope for his draft horses, preparing to head back to the Campbell Ranch. "I will be here next Sunday, dawn if that suits you." "Dawn," Penelope agreed. He swung up onto his riding horse with easy grace, the draft horses trailing behind. "One more thing, Miss Vaughn, you have a rifle." "I do. Keep it close. There have been drifters coming through, men without honest work looking for easy pickings. A woman alone is vulnerable." Penelope felt a chill despite the warm evening air. "I can handle a rifle." "I do not doubt it. Just be careful." He touched his hat brim in farewell, then rode off toward the west, the dust rising behind him in the golden light. Penelope stood watching until he disappeared from sight, then turned back to her sadi. The field looked different now, marked by the straight furrows Wade had cut. It looked like something was possible, like maybe this land could be tamed after all. She went inside and sat at her small table, eating a cold supper and thinking about gray eyes and gentle hands, and the memory of her shoulders unburdened. That night, she lay in her narrow bed and listened to the prairie wind, and for the first time in months, she felt something besides exhaustion and fear. She felt hope, and it scared her more than anything because hope could be broken, and she was not sure she could survive that again. The week passed in hard labor. Penelope worked from dawn until dark, clearing rocks from the broken field, repairing fence, tending her small vegetable garden, and doing the 100 other tasks that never ended. Her body ached constantly, but it was a familiar ache, one she had learned to push through. She thought about Wade more than she wanted to admit, remembering the quiet competence in his movements, the way he had not needed thanks or praise, just worked because the work needed doing. On Saturday evening, she found herself preparing for his return, scrubbing herself clean in the copper pot, washing her hair, putting on her one good dress. Then she stopped, looking at herself in the small, cracked mirror that hung on the soddy wall. What was she doing? Wade O'Brien was coming to help with field work, not to court her. She changed back into her work dress, pinned her hair up firmly, and told herself to stop being foolish. But Sunday morning, she was awake well before dawn, coffee already boiling, bacon sizzling in the pan. When she heard the horses, her heart jumped in a way that had nothing to do with the work ahead. Wade rode in as the sky was turning gray with approaching dawn, his draft team trailing behind him. He looked tired, Penelope thought, as if the week had been hard on him too. But he smiled when he saw her, a real smile that reached his eyes and made something warm bloom in her chest. "Morning, Miss Vaughn." "Morning, Wade. I have coffee ready. Smells like heaven." He dismounted, taking a moment to stretch before tending to his horses. Penelope brought him coffee and a plate of bacon and biscuits, and they sat on her bench as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the prairie gold and amber. "How was your week?" Wade asked. "Long," Penelope admitted. "Yours?" "We had a stampede on Tuesday. Lost half a day gathering the herd back together." He sipped his coffee, looking out at the field. "But we got it sorted. That is ranch life." "You enjoy the work?" Wade considered the question. "I do. There is something honest about it. You work hard, things go well. You slack off, everything falls apart. Simple cause and effect. Not like farming," Penelope said with a touch of bitterness. "You can work yourself to death and still lose everything to weather or blight or market prices." "True enough." Wade set down his cup. "But at least you are working for yourself, building something that is yours. That means something. It will mean something if I can keep it." "You will." He said it with such certainty that Penelope almost believed him. They worked through the morning, Wade behind the plow, Penelope following with a heavy rake, breaking up the largest clods of earth and removing rocks that might damage the planter. It was hard work, but different when shared, made lighter by the presence of another person. Wade talked as he worked, telling stories about ranch life, about cattle and horses and the men he worked with. Penelope found herself laughing at some of the tales, the sound feeling strange in her throat, as if she had forgotten how. She told him about her life too, haltingly at first, then with growing ease. About growing up in Missouri, about marrying Thomas more for practical reasons than love, though she had come to care for him. About the journey west, full of hope and plans. About the brutal winter and Thomas falling ill, dying in this soddy while the snow piled up outside and she could do nothing but watch. "I am sorry," Wade said quietly. "That is a hard thing to bear alone. I had no choice. We always have choices. You chose to stay to fight for this land." "That takes courage." Penelope shook her head. "It takes stubbornness. Courage would have been going back home admitting defeat." "I disagree." Wade stopped the team, turning to face her. "Courage is not giving up when everything says you should. Courage is standing your ground even when you are scared and alone and everything hurts. You have that in spades, Penelope Vaughn." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his low, rough voice did something to her. She met his eyes and saw respect there, admiration even, and it made her throat tight. "Thank you," she managed. They worked until midday when Wade called a halt to rest the horses. They ate together, sitting in the shade, and Penelope realized she was enjoying herself. When had work become enjoyable? When had the prairie stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like home? "Tell me about your mother," she said. "What was she like?" Wade was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "Strong," he said finally. "Stronger than anyone knew until she had to be. She was small, my mother, barely 5 feet tall, but she had a will like iron. When my father died, she never cried, not once where we could see. She just kept going, kept working, kept fighting." His jaw tightened. "But fighting takes a toll. You can be strong for only so long before something breaks. I am sorry you lost her." "Me too." Wade looked at her then. "That is why I am here, Penelope. I could not help her, but maybe I can help you. Maybe I can keep someone else from breaking under the weight of it all." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "I am stronger than I look. I know you are, but everyone needs help sometimes. That does not make you weak. It makes you human." They returned to work, and Penelope found herself thinking about his words. She had been so determined to prove she needed no one, that she could handle everything alone. But maybe strength was not about refusing help. Maybe it was about accepting it when offered, about letting people in even when it scared you. By evening, they had completed another 8 acres. Wade rubbed down the horses while Penelope brought water, and they stood together watching the sun set over the newly broken field. The wind carried the smell of fresh earth and the distant sound of coyotes calling. "I will be back next Sunday," Wade said. "We should finish the breaking and you can start planting." "I do not know how to repay you," Wade shook his head. "Nothing to repay. But if you want to do something for me, promise me you will take care of yourself. Eat proper, get enough rest, do not work yourself sick." "That is hard advice to follow when there is so much to do. I know, but try anyway." He swung onto his horse, gathering the lead rope for his team. "Good night, Penelope." "Good night, Wade." She watched him ride away, and this time when she went inside, the soddy did not feel quite so empty. She had something to look forward to, someone who cared whether she lived or died. It was both comforting and terrifying. The weeks fell into a rhythm. Wade came every Sunday at dawn, and they worked together through the day, breaking field, preparing ground, eventually planting seed. He brought supplies sometimes. things he said the ranch did not need, though Penelope suspected he was buying them himself. Grain for the horses, a new hoe to replace her broken one, a bag of sugar she had not tasted in months. They talked as they worked, sharing stories and dreams. Penelope learned that Wade had a younger sister living in Kansas City, married to a banker. That he had once thought about becoming a teacher before his father died and work became more important than education. That he loved horses more than people sometimes, because horses were honest and loyal and never lied about what they wanted. Wade learned that Penelope could sing, though she had not done so since Thomas died. That she missed her family back in Missouri, but was too proud to write and tell them how hard things were. That she had once wanted children but now was not sure she could bring a child into a life this difficult. Slowly, without either of them quite naming it, something grew between them. It was in the way Wade's hand would steady her elbow when the ground was rough. In how Penelope always had his favorite meal ready when he arrived. In the comfortable silences that stretched between them, filled with the sounds of work and wind and growing things. By late May, the planting was done. 32 acres of corn and wheat, neat rows that stretched across Penelope's claim like promises written in the earth. Wade stood at the edge of the field, hands on his hips, studying their work with satisfaction. "You did it," he said. "We did it," Penelope corrected. She stood beside him, feeling the evening breeze cool on her sun-warmed skin. "I could never have managed this alone. Maybe not this year, but you would have found a way. You are resourceful or stubborn. Same thing sometimes." Wade turned to look at her, and there was something different in his expression, something that made Penelope's breath catch. "Penelope, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "All right. I did not come here just to help you with field work." He took off his hat, turning it in his hands. "I mean, I did, but that is not the only reason I kept coming back." Penelope waited, not trusting herself to speak. "I have thought about you every day this week," Wade continued. "Every week, actually. I find myself looking forward to Sunday in a way I never have before. When I am at the ranch, I am thinking about what I will tell you, what stories might make you laugh, whether you are eating enough or working too hard." He met her eyes. "I care about you, Penelope. More than I probably should, given we have known each other only a couple months." "Wade." His name came out as barely a whisper. "I know this is not the time or place. You are still grieving your husband, still trying to save your farm. The last thing you need is some cowboy complicating things." He put his hat back on, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "But I had to tell you. It did not feel right, keeping it hidden." Penelope stood very still, feeling as if the world had shifted beneath her feet. She thought about Thomas, about the quiet affection they had shared that had never quite become passion. She thought about the long, lonely winter, the crushing weight of grief and responsibility. And she thought about these past weeks, how Wade's presence had made everything lighter, how she had started smiling again, laughing again, feeling again. "I grieve Thomas," she said slowly. "He was a good man, and I wish he had not died, but our marriage was practical, Wade. We cared for each other, but it was not a great love story. He wanted help with his claim, and I wanted security. It worked well enough." She took a breath. "These months alone have taught me something, though. Life is too short and too hard to settle for practical. If I am going to build a life here, I want it to be with someone I choose not because I need them, but because I want them." Wade went very still. "And do you want me, I mean?" "I do." Saying it aloud made it real, made it terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I look forward to Sundays too. I think about you during the week, wonder what you are doing, whether you are safe. When I see you ride up, everything feels right in a way it has not since Thomas died. Maybe even before that." Wade closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, and then his hands were cupping her face, gentle despite their calluses. "Penelope," he said, and then he kissed her. It was not like kissing Thomas had been, dutiful and pleasant. This was something else entirely, something that made heat bloom in her chest and spread through her limbs. Wade kissed her like she was precious, like he had been thinking about this for weeks and wanted to get it right. His lips were warm and firm, and when she leaned into him, she felt his arms go around her, strong and steady. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I did not come here planning to do that. I am glad you did." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped together as the sun set and the stars began to emerge. Finally, Wade stepped back, though he kept one hand on her waist, as if he could not quite bear to let go completely. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It is getting dark and I have to be up early tomorrow. I know. But I will be back next Sunday, and maybe if you want I could come by during the week sometimes, after work, just to check on you. I would like that." Wade smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less weathered. "Then I will see you soon, Penelope Vaughn." He kissed her once more, brief but sweet, then mounted his horse and rode away into the gathering darkness. Penelope stood watching until she could no longer see him, then wrapped her arms around herself and spun in a circle, feeling giddy and foolish and more alive than she had in years. True to his word, Wade came by twice that week, riding up in the twilight after a long day at the ranch. They would sit on her bench and talk, holding hands like young sweethearts, and sometimes he would kiss her good night before riding back to the Campbell bunkhouse. Penelope floated through her work, humming songs she had not remembered she knew, seeing beauty in the prairie she had once thought only harsh and unforgiving. On Sunday, Wade arrived not just with his draft horses, but with a wagon load of lumber. Penelope stared at it in confusion as he unhitched the team. "What is all this?" "You need a barn," Wade said. "That little lean-to you have will not protect anything come winter. I talked to Mr. Campbell and he sold me this lumber at cost. Figured we could spend Sundays building." "Wade, I cannot afford lumber. You are not paying for it. I am." He held up a hand as she started to protest. "Before you argue, think of it as an investment. When we get married, I am going to need somewhere to keep my horses. Makes sense to build it now." Penelope felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. "When we get married," Wade went still, clearly realizing what he had said. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "That was not how I meant to ask. But yes, Penelope, I want to marry you. I know it is fast and I know people will talk, but I do not care. I love you and I want to spend my life with you if you will have me." Penelope felt tears welling up, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Wade let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and held onto his shoulders. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "We should do it proper," Wade said. "Court for a while, let people get used to the idea. I do not want anyone saying I took advantage. How long were you thinking? 6 months. That would be November. After harvest, before the hard winter sets in." Penelope nodded. "That seems sensible." "Good." Wade kissed her soundly. "Now let me show you what I have planned for this barn." They spent the day working on the foundation, digging post holes and setting corner stones. It was hard work, but joyful, because they were building something together, planning a future. Wade talked about bringing his few possessions from the bunkhouse, about maybe building onto the soddy next year, making a real frame house. Penelope talked about chickens and a milk cow, about a proper kitchen garden, about all the things that seemed possible now that she was not facing them alone. Word spread quickly through El Dorado that Penelope Vaughn was being courted by Wade O'Brien from the Campbell Ranch. Some people were kind, happy that the young widow had found someone. Others were less charitable, whispering about impropriety and unseemly haste. Penelope found she did not much care what they said. She had spent too much time worrying about other people's opinions, trying to prove herself worthy and capable. Now she just wanted to be happy. The corn and wheat grew tall through June and July, fed by good rains and warm sun. Penelope tended it carefully, walking the rows daily, pulling weeds and watching for pests. Wade came as often as he could, and slowly, a barn took shape on her claim. It was not large, but it was solid, built to last, with space for horses and equipment and hay storage. In August, they set the wedding date for November 15th. Wade's sister Clara wrote that she would come from Kansas City, bringing her husband and their baby daughter. Penelope wrote to her own family in Missouri, a letter that was both invitation and explanation, trying to convey how her life had changed. To her surprise, her mother wrote back with congratulations and apologies for not helping more after Thomas died. They would try to come for the wedding, though the journey was difficult. Harvest began in late September. Wade took time off from the ranch, telling Mr. Campbell he had more important work to do. Together, he and Penelope cut and shocked the wheat, then turned to the corn. It was brutal, back-breaking labor that left them exhausted every night. But the yield was good, better than Penelope had dared hope. When they finally loaded the last wagon to take into town, Wade did the calculations and announced that she would clear her debts with enough left over to buy livestock and supplies for winter. Penelope cried then, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude and exhaustion. Wade held her while she sobbed, his hand stroking her back, murmuring reassurances. "You did it," he said. "You saved the farm. It is yours, free and clear." "Ours," Penelope corrected when she could speak again. "It will be ours soon." "Ours," Wade agreed and kissed the top of her head. They sold the harvest in El Dorado, and Penelope walked into the bank with cash in hand to pay off her loans. The banker, a sour man named Henderson who had been pressuring her for months, looked disappointed but accepted the payment. Penelope walked out of that bank feeling 10 feet tall, as if she could take on the world and win. With the remaining money, they bought 2 dairy cows, a dozen chickens, a pregnant sow, and enough supplies to see them through winter. Wade contributed his own savings, and they bought furniture for the soddy, planning ahead to when they would build a proper house. Penelope splurged on fabric for a wedding dress, cream-colored calico with tiny blue flowers, and spent her evenings sewing by lamplight. November arrived with frost and cold winds. The prairie turned brown and sere, but the barn was full of hay, and the animals were settled. Wade moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse to Penelope's barn, not quite living with her but close enough that he could help with morning and evening chores before riding to the ranch and back. Clara and her family arrived 2 days before the wedding, staying at the hotel in town. Penelope liked her immediately, a cheerful woman who cooed over the farm and told embarrassing stories about young Wade. Penelope's parents came on the evening train, her mother embracing her tightly and apologizing again for leaving her to struggle alone. "You are doing well now," her father said gruffly, shaking Wade's hand with approval. "This is a good man. I can see that." The wedding took place in the small church in El Dorado on a cold, bright morning. Penelope wore her new dress and carried wildflowers Wade had somehow found dried and preserved. Wade wore a new suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome, his hair neatly trimmed for the first time since she had known him. The ceremony was simple, attended by Clara's family, Penelope's parents, Mr. Campbell and several men from the ranch, and a few townspeople who had been kind to Penelope during her widowhood. When the preacher pronounced them married, Wade kissed her with such tenderness that Penelope felt tears slip down her cheeks. This was real. This was forever. This was the life she got to choose. They held a small reception in the church hall, eating food the women of El Dorado had prepared, dancing to music played on a fiddle and guitar. Wade held Penelope close as they swayed to a slow song, his breath warm against her ear. "Happy," he murmured. "So happy I could burst," Penelope whispered back. They left in the afternoon, riding back to the farm in a wagon Wade had decorated with ribbons. The families would leave the next day, but tonight was theirs alone. They did evening chores together, tending animals and closing up the barn, then went into the soddy that was now truly home. Wade built up the fire while Penelope lit lamps, both of them moving with a new awareness of each other. When Wade took her in his arms, Penelope went willingly. No fear or hesitation, only trust and want and love. He carried her to the narrow bed, and they loved each other with gentle passion, learning each other's bodies, making promises with touches and kisses and whispered endearments. Afterward they lay tangled together, warm despite the cold wind outside. Wade traced patterns on Penelope's shoulder, his touch light and reverent. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know I have said it before, but I want to say it now as your husband. I love you, Penelope O'Brien." Penelope smiled at her new name. "I love you too, Wade. Thank you for seeing me that day, for stopping, for helping. Thank you for saving me." "We saved each other," Wade said. "I was just going through the motions before I met you, working, sleeping, working again. You gave me something to live for, not just exist for." They fell asleep like that, wrapped together, and Penelope dreamed of growing things and bright futures. Winter came hard that year, with bitter cold and snow that piled up to the roof of the soddy. But inside, Wade and Penelope were warm, working together to tend animals and keep the farm running. They played cards by lamplight, read to each other from the few books they owned, made love and talked about plans for spring. "I want to add another 20 acres next year," Wade said one evening. "Maybe try some oats, see if we can grow enough feed to be self-sufficient." "Can we manage that much?" "I think so. I have been talking to Mr. Campbell. He is willing to sell me 5 breeding cows at a good price. We could start building our own herd, run them with the crops, diversify." Penelope considered this, excited by the possibilities. "We would need more help during harvest. We can hire day labor from town, or maybe find someone who wants to work shares." Wade pulled her closer. "I have been thinking about asking Clara and James if they want to come west. James is not happy at the bank and Clara misses open spaces. We could use help, and they could use a new start." "That is a wonderful idea." They wrote to Clara that week, laying out the proposal. To their delight, she wrote back within a month saying they were seriously considering it. James had family money that could help buy equipment, and Clara was eager to raise their daughter somewhere with room to grow. Spring came with mud and rain, and the hard work of planting. Wade had quit his job at the Campbell Ranch, much to Mr. Campbell's regret, and was now farming full-time. They planted 40 acres that year, Wade behind the plow and Penelope managing the seed drill they had bought with winter savings. It was exhausting work, but satisfying, watching their operation grow and expand. In early summer, Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, not wanting to get Wade's hopes up, but when she missed a second month and began feeling queasy in the mornings, she knew. She told Wade one evening after supper, watching his face carefully. "I think I am with child." Wade went very still, his eyes widening. Then a grin spread across his face so wide it looked like it might split him in two. "Truly, I believe so. It is early yet, but the signs are there." Wade let out a whoop and picked her up, spinning her around before setting her down carefully as if she had suddenly become fragile. A baby. We are having a baby. We are, Penelope confirmed, laughing at his reaction. Wade knelt down, placing his hands on her still flat belly with such reverence that Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Penelope ran her fingers through his hair, overcome with love for this man who had saved her in every way that mattered. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I am going to try." Wade stood, pulling her into his arms. "We should tell your parents and Clara. They will be so excited." They wrote letters that night, sharing the news, and responses came back full of joy and congratulations. Clara wrote that they had decided to move west in the fall, timing it so they could help with harvest and be there for the baby's birth. Penelope's mother promised to come as soon as the baby was close, to help with the delivery and the first difficult weeks. The summer passed in a haze of work and preparation. Penelope sewed tiny clothes, trying to imagine the child who would wear them. Wade built a cradle in the evenings, sanding it smooth and carving patterns along the edges. They talked about names, about how they would manage farming with a baby, about all the hopes and fears new parents carried. The harvest that year was even better than the previous one. With Wade working full-time and good weather holding, they brought in record yields. They sold the surplus and paid cash for the 5 breeding cows Mr. Campbell had offered, adding them to their small herd. The farm was growing, becoming something substantial, something that could support a family. Clara and James arrived in late September with their daughter Emma, now a toddling 2-year-old. They stayed in the soddy while Wade and James worked to build a second dwelling on the far side of the property, a small frame house that would be Clara's family's home. It was crowded and chaotic, but happy, full of laughter and shared meals and plans for the future. By October, the house was finished and Clara's family moved in. They all worked together for harvest, bringing in the crops before the first frost. It felt right, Penelope thought, having family close, building something bigger than just one couple and their dreams. Penelope's belly grew round and heavy as winter set in. She could no longer do the harder work, so she focused on cooking and mending and keeping the accounts, while Wade and James handled the livestock and heavy labor. Her mother arrived in early January, fussing over Penelope and driving her half-mad with worry and advice, but Penelope was secretly grateful for her presence. The baby came on a bitter cold night in late January 1880. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Penelope was certain she would not survive. But her mother and Clara were there, encouraging and helping, and finally, after hours of pain, she heard the sharp cry of her newborn son. Wade was allowed in moments later, his face pale with worry until he saw Penelope was all right. Then he looked at the tiny, red-faced infant in her arms, and tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. "A son," Penelope said tiredly. "We have a son." Wade sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one finger touching the baby's impossibly small hand. The infant grasped it reflexively, and Wade let out a shaky laugh. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Penelope." They named him William Thomas O'Brien, honoring Wade's father and Penelope's first husband. Little Will was a demanding baby, crying often and sleeping little, but Wade was endlessly patient with him, walking the floor at night so Penelope could rest, changing diapers without complaint, talking to his son in a low, gentle voice. "You are a natural," Penelope told him one afternoon, watching Wade rock the baby to sleep. "I had good examples," Wade replied. "My parents loved me well. I want to give Will the same." Spring came again, bringing new life to the prairie. Wade and James planted 50 acres that year, expanding the operation further. Penelope recovered from childbirth and threw herself back into the work of running the farm, while strapped to her back in a sling Clara had made. The baby seemed to thrive on the activity, watching everything with alert eyes, as if already learning the rhythms of farm life. Summer brought the news that Clara was expecting another child, due in the winter. The women celebrated together, talking about raising their children as cousins, close as siblings. James proved to have a gift for managing livestock, and their herd grew steadily, calves born healthy and strong. The years flowed past in the way of farming life, marked by seasons and harvests, by children growing and the farm expanding. Will was joined by a daughter, Margaret, in 1882, and then another son, Henry, in 1884. Clara had 2 more children, and the farm rang with the sound of young voices. They built a proper house in 1883, a 2-story frame structure with a kitchen big enough for the whole family, a parlor with a real store-bought sofa, and bedrooms upstairs for the growing children. The soddy became a storage shed, but Penelope never forgot the long winter she had spent there alone, or the spring morning when a cowboy with gray eyes had changed her life forever. By 1890, they were running 200 acres and a herd of 50 cattle. Wade and James had built a reputation for quality beef, and buyers came from as far as Kansas City. The farm employed 3 hired men, and during harvest, they brought in day labor from Dorado. What had started as one woman desperately trying to save a failing claim had become a thriving operation supporting 2 families. On a warm evening in late summer of 1890, Wade and Penelope sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over fields they had built together. Their children were inside, the younger ones being put to bed by Clara while the older ones did homework. Wade held Penelope's hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her palm. "Do you remember the day we met?" Penelope asked. "Every detail," Wade replied. "You were in harness, trying to pull that plow through soil that did not want to give. I thought you were the stubbornest, bravest person I had ever seen." "I thought you were interfering," Penelope admitted with a laugh. "I was so determined to prove I needed no help." "You did not need help. You needed support. There is a difference." Wade kissed her hand. "I am glad I stopped that day, glad I was stubborn enough to keep coming back." "So am I." Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, this man who had become her partner in every sense. "We have built something good here, Wade, something that will last beyond us." "We have," Wade agreed. "But it is not the farm I am most proud of. It is the life we made together, the family we have. That is what matters." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the prairie wind carrying the scent of growing corn and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. Will came out onto the porch, now a sturdy 10-year-old with his father's gray eyes. "Father, Mama, I finished my arithmetic. Can I go fishing tomorrow, if you finish your chores first?" Wade said. "I will, I promise." Will hesitated. "Father, when I grow up, I want to run this farm. I want to keep it going, make it even bigger." Wade and Penelope exchanged a look, pride and satisfaction passing between them. "Then we will teach you everything you need to know," Wade told his son. "This land, it is your legacy. Your grandfather Thomas started it and your mother and I built it up. Someday it will be yours to care for." Will nodded seriously, understanding the weight of what was being offered, then went back inside. Penelope smiled, thinking about the future, about grandchildren who would run through these fields, about the O'Brien farm becoming a fixture of Butler County, known for quality and integrity. "We should get inside," Wade said eventually. "Early start tomorrow." "Always an early start on a farm," Penelope said, but she was smiling. They went inside together, checking on the children, banking the fires, preparing for another day of work and life and love. As Penelope climbed into their bed, Wade beside her, she thought about that desperate woman who had been pulling a plow alone, certain she would lose everything. She had not lost. She had won in ways that mattered more than she could have imagined. Wade pulled her close, and she settled against him with the ease of long familiarity. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Penelope whispered back. Outside, the prairie wind sang its endless song, and the land they had claimed together rested under the stars, rich and fertile and full of promise. The work would continue tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that, but it was good work, shared work, the work of building a legacy. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness. A cowboy who saw a woman struggling and decided to help without being asked, without expecting anything in return. That moment had changed both their lives, had created something neither of them could have built alone. As sleep claimed her, Penelope smiled, grateful for rocky soil and stubborn pride and a man with gray eyes who had known just when to step in and just when to step back. They had worked side by side to build this life, and it was more than she had ever dreamed possible on that long-ago morning when she had been dragging a plow through rocky soil alone, before the cowboy had hitched his team without a word and given her not just help, but hope, and eventually, love that would last all their days. The years continued to unfold with the reliable rhythm of seasons on the Kansas prairie. By 1895, Will was 15 and working the farm alongside his father and uncle, already showing the steady competence that would make him a fine farmer. Margaret, at 13, helped her mother with the household and the kitchen garden, showing an interest in teaching that Penelope encouraged. Young Henry, just 11, was horse mad, spending every spare moment in the barn with the animals. Clara's children were growing too, and the combined families had become known in Butler County as hardworking and honest, the kind of neighbors you wanted nearby. The O'Brien-Warner partnership, as it was sometimes called, had weathered droughts and market downturns, had survived grasshopper plagues and early frosts, always bouncing back stronger. Wade and James had built a small schoolhouse on the property in 1892, hiring a young teacher to educate their children and those of neighboring farms. It had become a community gathering place, used for church services and social events. The farm that had begun as Penelope's desperate claim was now the heart of a small community. One Sunday in the spring of 1896, they held a celebration for Penelope and Wade's 18th wedding anniversary. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, bringing food and gifts, telling stories and dancing to fiddle music. As evening fell, Wade pulled Penelope aside, leading her away from the crowd to the old barn, the first building they had constructed together. "You remember building this?" he asked, running his hand along the weathered wood. "Every nail," Penelope said. "You were so determined that I should have proper shelter for the animals. Even before we were married, you were thinking about our future together." "I fell in love with you that first day," Wade admitted. "Watching you in that harness, refusing to give up, I knew then that you were someone special, someone worth knowing. I just did not know yet that you would become my whole world." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, his words could move her. "You saved my life, Wade. Not just the farm, but me. I was drowning in grief and exhaustion and fear. You threw me a lifeline." "We saved each other," Wade said, as he always did when she tried to give him credit. He pulled her close, and they swayed together to the distant music, alone in the barn where it had all started. "I want to ask you something. Anything. Are you happy, truly happy?" I know life has been hard at times, that we have struggled. I just want to know that you do not regret choosing this life, choosing me." Penelope pulled back to look at him. This man who had aged alongside her, gray now threading through his dark hair, lines carved deeper around his eyes from years of sun and wind. But those gray eyes were the same, clear and honest and full of love. "Wade O'Brien, I have never regretted a single day with you. Yes, life has been hard, but it has also been beautiful and full and rich. We have built something real together, raised children who are good and decent people, created a home that matters. How could I regret any of that?" Wade kissed her then, deep and long, and Penelope felt the same spark she had felt when he first kissed her 18 years ago in a newly planted field. Some things, she thought, did not fade with time. They walked back to the celebration hand in hand, and Penelope looked at the scene before her. Children playing tag in the yard, neighbors laughing over shared food, Clara and James dancing together while their youngest daughter clapped along. This was what they had built. This was what had grown from one act of kindness on a spring morning. The turn of the century came, bringing with it changes both large and small. Electricity reached El Dorado in 1902, though it would be years before it extended to the farms. Automobiles began appearing on the streets of town, though most farmers still relied on horses and wagons. The world was changing, but the fundamental rhythms of farm life remained constant. Plant, tend, harvest, rest, repeat. Will married in 1903, bringing home a quiet, capable young woman named Sarah who fit into the farm life as if born to it. They moved into the old frame house James and Clara had built, which had been empty since Clara's family moved to a larger place on the other side of the property. Wade and Penelope became grandparents in 1904, a grandson named Robert who had Wade's gray eyes. "We are old now," Penelope said, holding baby Robert and marveling at how the years had flown. "Speak for yourself," Wade replied, but he was smiling, bouncing his great-niece Emma's daughter on his knee. "I feel spry as ever," but they were aging, both of them, the hard work of farming taking its toll. Wade's hands ached on cold mornings, and Penelope tired more easily than she once had. They began stepping back, letting Will take over more of the day-to-day operations while they focused on the lighter tasks and the joy of grandchildren. Margaret had become a teacher, running the little schoolhouse they had built, engaged to a young banker from El Dorado. Henry had started his own horse breeding operation on the far side of the property, showing a real talent for training and showing. All three of their children were happy and settled, building their own lives while staying close to home. On a summer evening in 1908, Wade and Penelope sat on their porch swing, watching lightning bugs rise from the fields. They were 63 and 52 respectively, considered old by the standards of the time, though both were still active and healthy. "Do you ever think about how different your life would have been if I had not stopped that day?" Wade asked. Penelope considered this. "I suppose I would have lost the farm eventually, gone back to Missouri, maybe remarried eventually, but I would not have had this." She gestured at the farm spread before them, the lights glowing in the windows of their children's homes, the land that bore their mark. "I would not have had you or our children or this life we built. I would have survived, but I would not have truly lived." "I think about it sometimes," Wade admitted. "What if I had ridden past that morning? What if I had convinced myself it was not my business? I would have stayed at the Campbell Ranch, probably saved some money, maybe bought my own place eventually. But I would have been alone, just going through the motions. You gave me purpose, Penelope. You gave me a reason to get up in the morning beyond just work." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came after decades of partnership. Penelope reached for Wade's hand, lacing her fingers through his, and felt the same rightness she always felt when they touched. "We have had a good life," she said softly. "The best," Wade agreed. "And it is not over yet." He was right. They had more years together, watching their grandchildren grow, seeing the farm continue to thrive under Will's management. They traveled some, taking the train to Kansas City to visit Clara's eldest son who had moved there for work. They attended Margaret's wedding and Henry's, celebrating as their children found their own partners and began building their own families. But most of all, they simply lived, finding joy in the small moments. Morning coffee shared in their kitchen, evening walks through fields they had planted together, Sunday dinners with 3 generations gathered around a table that had been built by Wade's own hands. They grew older together, gray and weathered like the barn they had built in their first summer, but still solid, still standing, still essential. On a warm afternoon in the spring of 1915, Penelope and Wade stood at the edge of their property, looking out over land that stretched as far as the eye could see. They were 70 and 59 now, both feeling their age more acutely, but still alert, still present, still deeply in love. 37 years, Penelope said. "We have been married 37 years. Best 37 years of my life," Wade said. He put his arm around her waist and she leaned into him, fitting against his side as perfectly as she always had. "Do you remember what you said to me once? That you wanted to build a life with someone you chose because you wanted them, not because you needed them." "I remember. I hope you feel that I have lived up to that. I hope you have never regretted choosing me." Penelope turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "Wade O'Brien, you have been my partner, my best friend, my love, and my home. You have given me everything I ever wanted and so much I did not know to want. I have never, not for one single day, regretted choosing you." Wade's eyes were bright with tears. "I love you, Penelope. I have loved you since the day I saw you dragging that plow, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Penelope whispered. And they kissed, 2 old people who had built something beautiful together, who had taken hard circumstances and transformed them into a legacy that would outlast them both. They walked back to the house together, Wade's arm around Penelope's shoulders, her arm around his waist. The evening sun painted the prairie gold and amber, the same colors it had been on that morning so long ago when everything had changed. The farm spread around them, filled with family and life and promise, a testament to what could be built when 2 people chose to work together, to love together, to face whatever came with shared strength and unwavering commitment. That night, surrounded by children and grandchildren for Sunday supper, Penelope looked around the table and felt such profound gratitude it nearly overwhelmed her. This abundance, this richness, this love, it had all started with rocky soil and stubborn determination, and a cowboy who had stopped to help without expecting anything in return. "Thank you," she mouthed silently to Wade across the table. "Thank you," he mouthed back, understanding as he always did. And in that moment, Penelope knew that they had not just survived. They had not just built a farm or raised a family or accumulated wealth. They had created something far more valuable, a love that had weathered every storm, a partnership that had deepened with every passing year, a life that had been lived fully and joyfully and together. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the inevitable changes of age. Wade's health began to decline in 1918, a weakness in his heart that the doctor said was common in men who had worked hard all their lives. He could no longer do the heavy labor, but he supervised Will's work, offered advice drawn from decades of experience, and spent long afternoons with his grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days. Penelope watched over him with fierce protectiveness, making sure he rested, that he did not overtax himself, that he took the medicine the doctor prescribed. But she could see him slipping away, a little more each day, and it terrified her. After so many years together, she could not imagine life without him. On a cold morning in January 1920, Wade did not wake up. He had gone to sleep beside Penelope, holding her hand as he always did, and simply never woke. The doctor said his heart had given out in the night, that he had felt no pain, that it was as peaceful a passing as anyone could hope for. Penelope sat beside his body for hours, holding his still warm hand, unable to process that he was truly gone. After 42 years together, after building a life and a family and a legacy, after everything they had shared, he was gone, and she remained. They buried Wade on a hill overlooking the farm, beneath a stone that bore his name and the words beloved husband, father, and friend. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, neighbors and friends and business associates, all of whom had stories of Wade's kindness, his integrity, his willingness to help without asking for anything in return. In the months that followed, Penelope struggled. The grief was overwhelming, a physical thing that sat on her chest and made breathing difficult. She moved through her days like a ghost, tending to necessary tasks, but feeling no real connection to the world around her. Her children worried, hovering close, but she pushed them away, needing to work through this loss in her own time. It was Will who finally broke through, sitting with her one evening in early spring. "Mama," he said gently, "Father would not want you to give up. He loved you too much for that." "I know," Penelope whispered, "but I do not know how to live without him, Will. He was my whole world." "He was a big part of your world," Will corrected. "But you are still here, and so are we. Your children, your grandchildren, this farm you and Father built together. That is your world too, and it needs you." Penelope looked at her son, this man who had Wade's eyes and his steady competence, and felt something loosen in her chest. Will was right. Wade would not want her to simply give up and die. He would want her to keep living, to find joy again, to appreciate all they had built together. Slowly, painfully, Penelope began to rejoin the world. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories of their grandfather. She worked in her garden, finding solace in the feel of earth and growing things. She helped Will manage the farm's accounts, drawing on decades of experience to guide the next generation. And every evening, she walked to the hill where Wade was buried and talked to him, telling him about her day, about the grandchildren growing, about the farm continuing to thrive. She felt him there, his presence not gone but transformed, living on in the land they had claimed together, in the children they had raised, in the love they had shared. Penelope lived on for another 12 years, passing away peacefully in her sleep in 1932 at the age of 76. She was buried beside Wade on the hill, beneath a matching stone. The farm passed to Will and his sons, the legacy continuing into the third generation. But the true legacy was not the land or the buildings or the cattle. It was the story of two people who had met by chance, who had chosen to build something together, who had loved each other faithfully through decades of hard work and joy and sorrow. It was a story told around dinner tables for generations, about a woman who had refused to give up and a cowboy who had stopped to help, and how that single moment had changed both their lives forever. The farm still stands today, run by the descendants of Wade and Penelope O'Brien, a testament to what can be built when two people choose partnership over independence, love over practicality, and shared struggle over lonely pride. The barn Wade built that first summer still stands, weathered but solid, and the fields still produce crops each year, fed by the same rocky soil that had seemed so impossible so long ago. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the light is just right, you can almost see them. A woman in harness pulling a plow, determined and desperate and brave, and a cowboy who hitched his team without a word and changed her world. They are there in the land itself, in the legacy they left behind, in the proof that sometimes the hardest beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. Their story became legend in Butler County, told and retold, changing slightly with each telling but always maintaining the essential truth. That love can be found in the unlikeliest places, that kindness given freely can change lives, and that the strongest partnerships are forged not in easy times but in the shared struggle against hard odds. The little schoolhouse they built still stands, though it is now a community center. The house they raised their family in was renovated and expanded but retains the core structure Wade built with his own hands. And on the hill where they are buried, someone grandchildren or great-grandchildren or descendants even further removed always keeps fresh flowers, a sign that they are remembered, that their love story continues to matter, because in the end, that is what lasts. Not the acres or the cattle or the buildings, as important as those were. What lasts is the story of two people who found each other when both needed it most, who built a life together one day at a time, who loved each other through everything life threw at them, and who left behind not just descendants but a legacy of partnership and perseverance and profound, abiding love. The prairie wind still sings over that land, carrying with it the echoes of laughter and hard work, of children growing and love deepening, of two people who took rocky soil and impossible odds and transformed them into something beautiful. And somewhere in that wind, if you listen carefully, you can still hear them. Penelope singing as she works in her garden, Wade's low voice talking to his horses, both of them building and loving and living, together always, even after death could not part them. That is the real legacy of Penelope and Wade O'Brien. Not just a successful farm or a large family, though those are significant achievements. The real legacy is the proof that love, real love, can transform lives, can give strength in the darkest times, can create beauty from hardship. It is the proof that sometimes one act of kindness, one decision to help without expecting anything in return, can ripple out through generations, changing lives that have not even been born yet. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives in extraordinary times, facing challenges that would have broken lesser souls. But they faced them together, and that made all the difference. They built not just a farm but a home, not just a business but a legacy. Not just a marriage, but a love story that would be remembered and retold as long as there were O'Briens working that Kansas soil. And so the story ends where it began, with rocky soil and stubborn determination, with a woman who refused to give up and a cowboy who stopped to help, with love found in the unlikeliest of places, and built into something that would outlast them both. It is a story of the American West, of homesteading and hardship and hope. But most of all, it is a love story, pure and simple, about two people who found each other and chose each other, and loved each other through everything life could throw at them, creating something beautiful that would last for generations. That is the story of Penelope Vaughn and Wade O'Brien, of a plow dragged through rocky soil and a team hitched without a word, of a love that began in desperation and grew into something profound and lasting. It is a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth celebrating, because it reminds us that even in the hardest times, love can bloom, hope can survive, and two people together can accomplish what neither could manage alone.